Frankly, I just think you fixed Mega Games when you said take out all the pieces. That's it. They're done. Perfect.
That's it. Yeah,
Completely componentless.
you just sell
Mega
tickets,
game.
have a venue,
Awesome.
and then people wander in, and then there's nothing. You just let them chill out in there and just see what happens. Sounds like something Johan would do.
You just do the what was it? The Willy Wonka.
Oh my god! Yeah.
This is episode 31 of The Great Game. This is a podcast where Jack and myself, Patrick, from Australia, Mega Game enthusiasts ourselves, chat to people all around the world in the global Mega Gaming community about all types of things. And hopefully, somewhere along the way, pull out a bit of wisdom for you all. In this episode, we got to chat with Nellie from Melbourne Megagames and Chris from Very Large Huge Games. If you're a frequent listener, you would have heard from both of them before. And we're talking about theme and tone to Mega Games and what role it plays in, from design all the way up to selling tickets. Hopefully you will enjoy this episode. We are really keen to hear what you think about theme and tone and its role in the design process as well as the marketing process and the player experience. Is there a wrong theme for a Mega Game? Is there a tone that under no circumstances should be brought to the Mega Game space? Or is there a theme that you don't think has been given enough love? We would love to hear from you. So if you want to get in touch, all the links are in the description below. And by all means, let us know your thoughts on the issue. Likewise, we are always keen to hear from people who have a subject that they would like discussed. If you would like to be on the podcast to talk to us about something, or if there is someone in the Mega Game community, or a game in the Mega Game community worldwide that you would really like to hear from or about, drop us a line. Hopefully you enjoy this conversation about tone and theme in Mega Games. All right. Well, again, Chris, thank you for joining us this morning, and Nellie this afternoon. Before we jump into the discussion, did you want to just quickly remind anyone who's listening along for the first time and hasn't heard your voice before who you are and where you're from? Nellie?
Hello, I'm a mystery. You should go back and listen to past episodes.
Mm-hmm.
No, I run Melbourne Megagames with a couple of others, and I also research games in my not very much spare time.
And Chris.
Yeah, so I help run Very Large Huge Games in the UK, and we've done a few 200-player games. And I also help run Mega Game Assembly, where there's a calendar of all known Mega Games in the world at any given time.
Yes, very frequently spouted and spooked on this podcast because it's much easier than us trying to keep a calendar of our own. So thank you for that.
All good. Very happy to help.
So we wanted to talk about theme today, and the scope of that conversation kind of grew over time. But it originally came from you, Chris, you saying, that you were interested in an episode about how theme is important and how important it is to running a game. And then Nellie, out of character, said, I have thoughts about this. So we decided we'd make it your problem about making an episode out of it. But I suppose since you sort of pitched the idea, Chris, did you want to give us a bit of a spiel about, whether theme matters? And because I think I know your answer, why does it matter?
Yeah, fair enough. I'm quite militant about this, I have to say. I think it really matters. Like, I don't know, like if you Mega Games, obviously most people think, there's no set definition of what a Mega Game is. Most people think sort of 40-ish players. So if you want to get 40 players on something that most people don't know what a Mega Game is, tone helps so much. It's so important. Like the reason I think that specifically, well, we all know about the video and Watch the Skies, and the reason Watch the Skies I think is so popular is because it's about aliens coming to Earth. Who doesn't like that idea? Like, it's fantastic. Like, if you either you're playing a government or you're playing an alien or something in between, it just gets people along. If someone sit down and videoed I don't know, something else that was basically Watch the Skies without aliens, it wouldn't have got the kind of hooks and people along that Watch the Skies does. The aliens really make it. And we've run First Contact, I think, 3 times now, which is sort of roughly 175, 200 players playing a different type of version of Watch the Skies, so aliens coming to Earth. But I would love to play just it with a political simulation, right? I'd love that personally, but I know we wouldn't get the players. So I think theme is vital, I have to say. That's my pitch.
You are very militant, and I'm
I
surprised.
am very militant about this.
I'm not. I don't think I disagree with you, although I am curious how anecdotal your claim is that if Shut Up and Sit Down made a video about a game that wasn't Watch the Skies and say it was just a geopolitical game and it was more about the national politics and stuff, that it wouldn't have got as much attention. I don't know if I agree with that, because I feel like they were kind of just peeling off the veneer of this thing that no one had ever seen before. And I feel like unless it was some dry, very technical war game or political game from the past, I feel like it would have still had the same impact. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I took away from that different things to other viewers.
Maybe, but it probably would have been just like what's the Model UN, right? It would have just been Model UN, really. If it wasn't for the aliens. Oh, I'm militant. It's all good. Yeah, you may be right. I don't think you are.
Nellie, do you have any other thoughts on why theme and tone matters to a game?
Yes, I am going to agree with Chris.
Yeah.
I think the thing with Watch the Skies is that there's 2 parts, right? There is the geopolitics, which everyone who has kind of a high school education or who watches the news is going to be able to look at that and understand exactly what is happening and what all the stereotypes are in all of the teams. And Chris used the word hook. And that's what I think theme is. It is the hook into the story and the role play. But even at a game design level, I think theme is where interesting game mechanics come from. I tutor a game design class at university, and they're at the stage of refining prototypes at the moment. And the games that have a really strong theme also have really interesting mechanics, and the games that have a really weak theme have ended up they're struggling. They did their first round of playtesting and they're like, there just really isn't much here. And I'm like, okay, well, can you go back to your theme and see what you can pull? And they're like, why don't you add a second theme, something else, to try and make it more interesting? So from the design perspective, I think like theme is to me the best starting point.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So the other part of Watch the Skies, obviously, the geopolitics, but then the aliens. Like Chris is right. If you don't have the aliens, then it is just Model UN, and that's fine. But that's not as exciting as then having, First Contact happen.
Definitely. And I think, it is both sides of it, right? The aliens are exciting, but also the fact that you're not just playing, you're not all playing aliens or sci-fi factions. I think the fact that you are saying, I'm going to be put in the role of the Prime Minister of Australia, or in these roles of people that you know, or like in a real world-ish situation, but with this unprecedented sci-fi element, I think that does add a lot to the game and is kind of critical. But with theme, I was saying I completely agree. I think theme is obviously critical for hooking players in. It's critical for, I personally am I think they call it a top-down designer, which is where you start from the theme and then go to the mechanics. That's definitely my preference as well. And then also, I think the third thing that theme does that is really critical is help explain those mechanics and explain those rules to players when they're getting it. If you have a totally abstract game and totally abstract mechanic, it is a lot harder for people to get their heads around what they do and how this works. Instead of saying, you're a president, you do things that a president might do. It kind of helps you hook in and understand the mechanics a lot easier than a more abstract theme would, I think.
So I think I've decided just now that I'm going to be the antagonist for this.
Someone has to be. We
That's a good idea, definitely.
Come on this podcast every week and agree with each other.
So just for the sake of it, I'm curious. devil's advocate, I suppose. Everything from this point on is devil's advocate because I tend to agree with you all, or just not have strong feelings about some of these things. But I guess if we're talking about theme being a tool to help explain mechanics, for example, obviously that sounds true. When you compare it to a highly abstract game, it's much easier to connect with ideas. Sometimes if tokens are called megabucks or something like that, rather than just something generic. I mean, that's still generic. It's a bad example. But I'm wondering, like, how much of this is just subjective interest in subject or genre? And if we were to have a single mega game, so Watch the Skies, if Watch the Skies was exactly the same mechanically, but it was a game about running pizza shops, would it still be as enthralling as a game because of its theme? Anyway, anyone?
I mean, if you, well, you'd have to bring in politics, wouldn't you? Like, you're trying to competition, and you're trying to beat, your rivals and City Hall breathing down your neck for, hygiene violations, all that kind of stuff. To me, no, it wouldn't be much fun. But then I mean, there was debate. I think East Midlands Mega Games in the UK, like for April Fool's Day, posted about Watch the Pies.
Mm-hmm.
And then that seemed to spark randomly seemed to spark a lot of conversation about how that would be a great game. Like, how is that a good game? Like, I don't get it, but it seems like some people might be interested in that kind of stuff. Maybe.
Yeah, right. And that's I guess that's my point. So is the theme? I feel like the agreed point is yes, the theme is important because it helps you relate to the game and maybe learn it and interact with it and immerse yourself in it. But what that theme is, does that matter necessarily as a blanket rule, or is it just is the theme just going to dictate the audience, I suppose, because of people's interests? And so the more generic or approachable a theme is, maybe is the more likely it's going to be a good game.
Here's my take. There are no bad themes, only bad designs or designers. You could take the running a pizza shop mega game, and you could make that exceptional if you were creative and you rounded it out in interesting directions, and you really were thoughtful about how to make that a good player experience. But I don't think there's anything inherently fun or not fun about that specifically. And also, it's going to come down to player preference, right? Like, you're going to have a whole group of people who are like, that is absolutely not it for me. Give me my deep space alien horror game. And you're going to have a group of people who are like, well, I absolutely have no interest in geopolitics, but the politics of competing fast food restaurants, I'm there.
And I mean, I brought that example up because I love pizza and I'm a pizza fiend, but I don't think I ever want to play a mega game about pizza. Not yet, anyway.
That's reasonable. I would go to bat for mundane themes. I think we don't see them in mega games as much, but they are, of course, very popular in board games, right? It's very normal to play a board game about running a pizza restaurant. Or video games like Overcooked is an incredible game about trying to run a restaurant and just manically running around as everything falls apart around you. And the recipes, you're trying to make recipes in more and more outlandish situations where you're suddenly on the back of two moving trucks trying to leap between them as you try to get the pizza in the oven. But I think mundane themes, it potentially changes the audience of who might be interested in that game. But I don't think if it is a theme that you're passionate about, I don't think it affects the quality of the game. I mean, for example, there's a board game called I believe it's called Kaleka or Q, which is about queuing for the shops in Poland in the communist era, where there's very severe food rationing, and which position you end up in the queue in the shopping line is absolutely critical. Jesus. And I think a lot of people would hear that and say, I never want to play that game, which is totally reasonable. But
I think Chris is ordering that right now.
I know, yeah. The British would love that. Sign me up immediately.
Of course, yeah. The Q expert on the call, the British. But Yeah, I think when that theme is delivered with like passion and with if it is something that you and the rest of your team are like really interested in, then it is really just, can you convey what is interesting about that theme to your audience, right? And I think anything goes. Like, I would love to see more mundane mega games about like neighborly disputes over the property line or whatever, right? Like
Oh,
that's my
Jack.
vibe.
We've got a game coming just about that in November.
Ooh, very
but
exciting.
but it's not just about that, right? It's got another
Well, no,
theme on top of it.
there are also vampires, yes. It's about how landlords are vampires.
There it
Right.
is.
Yep. So yeah, so I guess, I mean, this might be jumping ahead a little bit, but where we're going to talk about how you find your audience for a game. And I guess what I'm wondering is if any theme can be made into a mega game as long as it's supported by good design, does that mean that provided it is well designed, you're going to be able to find your audience with the same ease? Or are you going to find an audience based on how commonly approachable the theme is?
Yeah, I think this is the problem. You like I mentioned when I started talking, like you got to find 40. Well, the common sort of denominator is 40 players, right? Like, finding 40 players for a neighborly dispute game is not going to be easy at all. It's going to be so difficult. Like, how do you convey? Sitting down to play a mundane game as a board game or a video game is quite short. You're trying to, well, I mean, as mega games stand, it's like an all-day experience. It could be less, obviously, very easily, but like, you're not going to get people spending all day doing that. Well, you will find some, but not many, I don't think. That's the problem, finding the people.
Yeah, I think it.
Yeah,
Oh, you go, Jack.
you go, Nellie.
I think it depends on a range of factors, right? So, is this your first game? In which case, don't make it hard for yourself. Run Watch the Skies. Or what games have you run previously, and what is your community kind of interested in? So quite early on, we put out a survey to try and like understand who the people were who were coming to our games and kind of what the spread over different genres were. And I can pull the data up. It's quite interesting, but also I think probably quite predictable in that everyone went, yes, we love sci-fi. And we went, we know. And then it depends, I guess, how well you can convey what the actual gameplay experience is going to be like. And I think that is very, very hard to do, especially if you're also trying to hit people who have never been to a mega game before, because then you're trying to convince them or trying to explain to them what a mega game is and what the experience of playing that is going to be like. And then also explain using usually principles that they don't have reference points for, what the specific theme and mechanics are for that game. And often it's got this mechanic that's like this other mega game that they've never played or heard of. So that's where I think the trap actually is.
I think the approachability of the subject matter is important. Like, one thing that you said early on to me, Chris, I can't remember if it was on a podcast or not, but talking about the very large, huge games, and you're talking about spectacle. And like that's like one of the things that you're selling, and the game is based around. And I guess it would be harder, regardless of how suitable the mechanics are to the theme. It might be harder to create moments of drama and spectacle in a game about selling pizzas than a game about aliens invading.
Yeah, you want high drama, definitely. Like, we have in First Contact, we have a few things that we do inject throughout the game quite early on, but it is about the drama and the spectacle, in my opinion. Definitely, like you got to everybody's going to be getting their own story, and really, you're the hero of your own story, right? But like, you want to be able to say overall, the aliens are arriving, or pirates are raiding, your ships or whatever. You want something big, and or Battlestar Galactica, Den of Wolves. You're fleeing, the murderous wolves. You want something, a big hook, like Nellie said at the beginning. You want something, a big hook to pull people in and get them engaged right from the first sentence, which pizzas don't do.
You take that
Sorry.
back.
Sorry, I love a pizza, but no.
So, do you either of you think? Well, are there any? Which themes do you think are? Would you say are more suitable for a mega game, if there are such a thing as like themes that are not a good, maybe a good fit for other genres, but are not mega game themes in your mind, or would take more work to resolve in a mega game?
Well, so I said it before in that I think sci-fi is probably the easiest, and the one that there's so much diversity in sci-fi that you can get very different, like I guess subgenres. So you can do the political sci-fi or you can do the horror sci-fi, and those are the only two I can think of at the moment. But it's kind of that like indie drama space that I would say is harder to apply to a mega game. Like I do think there is substance to Chris's point that pizzas on their own are probably not enough. And so potentially the more like hyper specific you get, the harder it's going to be to do. Sci-fi is like very big and overarching. Pizza's very specific. And that's where being a mega game versus a board game, I think, causes problems. Because in a board game, if your board game is about assembling a pizza, that's good enough. But for a mega game, you're going to need a couple of different game spheres going that interact with each other in ways that allow players to kind of strategize over the course of 6 to 8 hours.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like you got to be zeitgeist, right? It's got to be pirates or zombies or be pirates, sci-fi, horror. I was quite surprised that Johann's Event Horizon works so well. I mean, I've played it once and helped facilitate a couple of times, but as much as you're a light-filled room probably, and you're surrounded by other people, and you're actually moving pieces around a board, you really can get the horror injected in there. It's quite surprising. I mean, because it's more, I guess, down the LARPy end of the spectrum, but players really get into it. So yeah, zeitgeisty stuff, aliens. I think I don't know who's running it soon, but the museum one. So basically, Indiana Jones, right? Like it's all the things that people can instantly understand, know from movies, books, board games, other media. Yeah, all that kind of stuff. And we're running. I mean, we played into the name, right? We're running Deeds and Destiny, which is essentially a fantasy Dungeons and Dragons type of game in June in London, and we sold out within a week. We've run. There's only 40 player only. It's 40 players for the first run, and we sold out in a week, which is incredible for us. We've never done that before. We've run bigger games obviously before, but even so, we've never sold that many that quickly. So, I honestly, the theme is vital, and we don't dress our sets, right? Like I'm not sure. I've never really heard of anybody dressing their sets in mega games, but we don't really have that. But it's the sort of imagination side of things. Like, what can I turn up looking like, and what can I possibly do on the game? That's where it comes in.
I do think that player fantasy side of things is critical as well. It's like, who do you want to see yourself as, or what role are you taking in the game, and why are you excited about that role? Why does that seem interesting, or an interesting person to be? Like, if you are the captain of a spaceship, or if you are, a world leader, or that style of thing, or a fantasy hero. They're very obvious and clear fantasies to being that person. And I don't think the fantasy needs to be inherently like, it doesn't need to be a power fantasy of like, you're the most cool and amazing and powerful person in the world. It is okay. I think it's okay for that fantasy to be, oh, I'm that person on the Event Horizon movie that's running around the ship desperately trying to stay alive. Like, that can be also a player fantasy. It doesn't need to be, I'm the coolest. But like, the thing of why would it be interesting and cool to be this person, that's a critical thing that kind of, I think, a mega game theme needs to answer for like all of the 40 player roles that you have.
Definitely.
Ideally.
And being a pizza spread chef, I'm afraid, doesn't cut it for me.
Well, look,
sorry.
See, I'm interested. I think you found the word that I was looking for, Chris, which is zeitgeist. I feel like when it comes to marketing an idea for a game, whether it's a mega game or otherwise, or a TV show or a book or a film, I feel like maybe less so these days because there's, the entertainment industry is saturated with all the streaming and all the rest of it. But I feel like when I was a bit younger, it felt like the zeitgeist of what was an interesting theme went in waves, and you could see it happening over time. And it was like, we're going to like pirates for a few years, and then we're going to get back to zombies, and then we're going to be talking about aliens, and eventually we're going to go back to pirates. And like, there's going to be all these things happening at the same time that are about pirates. I'm wondering, and I think this is a little bit of this might sting a little to some designers, but I'm wondering, like, how much do we need to rely on existing content, like media or ideas? Like you were saying, Jack, you don't have to be the hero in a story, but if you can relate to the Event Horizon film, or, for example, I'll take rather than targeting someone else's game, As the Fire Dies that I made, I was very much relying on people drawing the correlations to Frostpunk, even though the game ended up being quite different. The theme was designed and understood by the audience before the game had to be sold to them, I guess. I wonder how much we rely on that. And I'm wondering if we come up with the pizza shop game, that would only be palatable if there was some new TV series out there that was this HBO extraordinary series about running pizza shops and the politics that happens in the background of them. I wonder if then that game would sell out, in minutes, because people have this thing that exists in pop culture to attach it to. Am I being too cynical?
Well, it depends. Are you trying to get people to play The Bear, the mega game? Or are you trying to get them to play like more Overcooked, which is like there's still an underlying theme there of like, you will be under pressure in this game, but I guess in what mega game are you not?
Right.
But is it cutesy and cartoon, or is it like gritty and depressing?
Yeah, and like lots of yelling. I think the answer is that you could pull out two existing things to correlate it to, right? And so my question is, do you need one of those two things? It doesn't matter what it is, but do you need one of those two to be able to sell it properly? If
I think
starting,
so.
yeah, so if you just started from nothing and said this game is about running a pizza shop and it's really interesting, it's got a whole world built around it, and there's this backstory and all the characters are really unique, people are still waiting to hear, oh, it's like Overcooked.
I think it's nice to take inspiration and influence from people, things that people know and love, and then maybe take it one step outside or add one twist to it or something like that. That's
Yeah.
just my preference, at least. Like, you don't want to go too far where it's like, oh, this is so out there and crazy. It's nothing anyone has ever heard of. No one even knows who, it's so innovative that it's impossible for anyone to even know what the game is or how it's working, and they're all completely confused by it. And on the other hand, you don't want it to be just like, oh, it is exactly like this other thing I already know. It is exactly just it's just this movie. It's just this TV show that I've seen exactly. Well, I mean, inherently when you make it a mega game, it'll change it. But
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying? Like, I like to. I think it is good to add one thing to it, or like one step away from the thing that is already popular, but while still keeping like the thing that people love about it, ideally.
Yeah. I think that if Melbourne Megagames announced that we were running Pizza Madness, the mega game, we would sell that out, but we would get half the players showing up expecting one thing tonally, and half the players showing up expecting something completely different tonally. And so I think there's a key difference between theme and tone. And something else I was thinking about as we were talking is, I think it's actually less about the individual player identity and a lot more about the team identities as part of that, and how stereotypable is the team identity. And Dave made a really elegant point in, I think it was the Mega Game Coalition Discord, about how when you play a mega game compared to something like a LARP, you're not often role playing as like fantasy character, the barbarian. You're role playing as Dave or as Nellie, the barbarian, and that is tangibly different to both a LARP and a board game. And that's the thing that I think theme's kind of irrelevant too. You will always be able to insert yourself into that story in some way, but your team identity governing what direction you want to take the game's story in, I think, is much more important.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. I think that's pretty spot on.
And I think God Emperor doesn't even have specific player roles. You aren't saying like, I am this person, I am the Master of Whispers or whatever. It is only a team identity.
Yeah.
So I think I completely agree there that I think the team identity, I mean, of course, having a player identity is nice. It gives you something good to grip onto. But I do agree that the team fantasy and the team identity is probably more important, I guess, depending on the game. But yeah.
So I guess separate to theme, we also want to talk about tone a little bit. Tone being sort of like you were saying, Chris, and what I was actually surprised to hear it, how you actually can get those horror undertones from playing Event Horizon, that kind of thing. How serious is the game? How zany is it? How confronting is it? How ridiculous is it? And I guess there's a lot of questions I have about tone, but just to start off, separate to theme, whereas you can kind of control the theme of a game by pitching it and marketing it and building it into the design. Do you think that you can ultimately control the tone of a game when you hand it over to 40 or maybe 200 players? Or is it, out of your control at that point?
I think for First Contact to 200 players, it's completely out of our control. Like I've likened it to when I've talked to people before. It's like we've built the snowball, and now we're pushing it down the side of the cliff. Like off you go. Like it's your game now. We can't do anything really to beyond pushing over the hill to direct it. Like we don't. We can certainly in our rule books. I mean, for First Contact we've got a lot of rule books, but if you're a president, you probably read the main rule book and then your 2 or 3 page one. So it's more around you're trying to lead and what have you. But you can be as zany as you want, and I've seen teams be completely mad. Like, and there's nothing you can't walk up to them and go, look, you're the United Kingdom. You shouldn't be this mad. You're supposed to be you're supposed to be quite a stabilizing force in the UK, in the world, and you're just being, you're just having. Alien, you're just having babies with aliens. What are you doing? You can't say that. Like, it's impossible. Apart from the fact that you don't know what's going on at the time, you just couldn't walk up to the players and say that. I don't think they're having their own game and having a great time. Yeah, I don't. It's probably is it even easier at 40 players? I'm not sure it is. You can set the tone that you want, and like if you've got like an operational war game, that's going to be very different to say Watch Skies of First Contact. Like you haven't got aliens landing in the middle of the battlefield. It's much more serious. You are trying to win a war. Yeah, no, I don't think it's possible to control tone. I have to say, that's not a bad thing.
Nellie, any thoughts on tone and setting it?
Yeah, so I tend to agree that it is out of your control to a point. And that, I think, depends how well you've marketed the game, and then what's the lead in that you give the players day of. So when we did So Say We All, we did a little narrative intro that was pretty grim. That was you are lost in space. The aliens are chasing you. Humanity's kind of been wiped out. And that really colored the experience, and meant that in that game there was a lot. We actually did it too well in the second game because one of the alien players was like, "Oh, I feel bad now," and so then didn't go as hard against the humans as he quite possibly could have. And I think I've had several conversations with him about it since, where he was like, "I just didn't really realize how much the facilitators would have been able to mediate on that." And so the other element of it depends is what are the levers that you've got in the game, and where is a reasonable line to draw if a player comes up to you and is like, "I would like to do this thing." And provided that, I guess, it passes the sniff test or the pub test for that's within the theme already, we really try and not say no to players, which I think is what Chris was saying as well. But what do you do when one team's mental model of the game and its theme is at the opposite end of the spectrum to another team's mental model of the game. You kind of just have to be like, well, this is a collaborative storytelling exercise. You're just going to have to reconcile that in how you play this out. But in that instance, I would probably be thinking we did not do a great job of communicating what this game is kind of trying to say. And one of the other things we did for So Say We All was we pulled out game values, I guess, which is more a like literary analysis tool of, this game's guiding principles are there is always a level of hope. Everything is going to come at a cost. We pulled out 4 and we gave them to the facilitators to be like, when players come up to you and they ask you for this, for whatever they want to do, refer back to these and use them to guide how you want to narrate that out. So it's also, how much freedom have you given the players? Have you given them a microphone? Because this is the other mistake we made at So Say We All, is that the microphone was just up on the stage and the players could go up and walk and speak into it at any time. Whereas previous games, well, because government was fluid and people kept getting, accused of being aliens. So it was really useful for them to be able to do that. But yeah, compared to other games where the microphone access is a little bit more tightly controlled, it does mean that people can just get up and broadcast to the room whatever they want.
Oh,
Risky
fair
business.
enough. Risky.
Yeah, I was interested in the tone thing, like I said earlier on when we talked to you, Chris and Zane, about Aftermath and how you had marketed it as being a it's got some mature themes just based on what it is, and like its inspirations, but also just the setting of it. But I'm curious, now that I've run a game which we also flagged had some pretty dicey political content in it. I mean, we kind of put that out there for the Generalissimo is Dead, that it's a satire, but here's some things that could come up, like, corruption and xenophobia and stuff like that. I'm curious, in Aftermath, when you ran it and you sort of marketed it as a game, so like Nellie was saying, you kind of led people in understanding what themes it might touch. Did those things then end up coming up? The things that you sort of felt like you needed to signpost?
Yes, short answer. They did, and I think it's because we signposted them, honestly. So Aftermath is obviously Zane's sort of post-apocalyptic game. Again, we ran it to, I think it was 175 in the end, but it's about, the UK or the whole, well, you think the whole world, you're not really sure, but the UK certainly has completely destroyed itself. There's like 1% of people left, and you've been 6 months of winter, and you're trying to come out of it now and rebuild what is left, and gather resources and try and rebuild your lives. And I don't know if it's because, I do know. I think it's because we was sort of in our sort of theme warning. We said, there could be aspects of slavery or cannibalism or other horrible, shocking things, and you need to be 18 years or older to play. And please come in understanding these things could happen. And we had, not to laugh at it, it's not funny, but we had a clown. Well, it wasn't a clown team. It was it was called the Dreamweaver Circus Team. So they were like 3 players who were who managed to survive it was a very, very, very serious game. They survived this apocalypse by staying in their massive tent. And so when they came out of came out into the aftermath, they decided that they were going to start kidnapping other survivors, so non-played survivors, and turning them into canned meat in their big top tent. It's absolutely bad. And I think they chose that because we basically, I think, I haven't spoken to the team, so maybe I'm completely wrong, but I think it's because we simply called out cannibalism as a potential problem in the game. And so they were canning people. Some of the teams were happily buying them because they didn't food.
I'm so glad you said that, which is a completely normal thing to respond to someone saying the players turned to cannibalism about. But again,
Jesus.
Go on.
Well, to go back to So Say We All, we had a whole conversation. This is another like Battlestar Galactica inspired mega game for point of reference. We we had a whole conversation with the facilitators where we were like, we're going to give you the worst version of what we think the players may come up with in this game so that you are prepared to respond to it. And to the players, we just said, just be mindful of like people's emotional reactions when you're doing things, and we'll intervene if necessary. And so the players, like, we signal to them, like, we're watching out for your safety in this space. But we very explicitly didn't say, hey, maybe, like, you know, just watch out for themes of torture, because we didn't want to give them ideas. And that worked really well, I think. But boy, was that facilitator meeting really grim.
Talking of torture, I really don't want to, but talking of torture, there's also a torture incident aftermath, which just was horrifying. And we didn't talk about torture either. I'm like, what? Like what? It was awful.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about that in relation to First Contact, because, you know, one of the things we've kind of been talking about in Brisbane lately as well, with us looking at some Watch the Skies stuff, is that on the one hand, Watch the Skies, I think the tone it usually hits is like a parody of world politics. Like it's pretty silly, depending on the game, I guess. But you often get those stories coming out of the game of, you know, the French team decided to turn the Eiffel Tower into a giant laser, or, you know, the UN got abducted to the moon. But on the other hand, it does take place in the real world, and so there are a lot of, you know, serious real world geopolitical issues that can be a part of the game. So I'm curious how you decided to handle that in terms of tone and in terms of, with First Contact.
So I was going through, specifically Russia and Israel's briefs last night, because they're both included in the game, and obviously at the moment in the world, their actions are less than desirable. Let's put it that way. So I was going through what we'd written for them last night before this today, and we essentially. We did say to the Israeli team, like, you dislike greatly Iran, and you work with the other Middle East powers, but you certainly can't have any sort of Middle East peace breakout with Iran involved in any way. You know, you just dislike them completely. But other than that, we really kind of pointed them towards other things. I won't spell out all the objectives, because if anybody's going to play this after listening to this, they want to know them all. But like we very much pointed them towards things that they could achieve in their region, or in space, or working with their allies, the US or the UK or whoever else. And then for Russia, in our first two games, we definitely, in our handbook, we sort of made up a bit of history, because obviously First Contact set sort of 2035, so it's quite a few years in the future. So we basically said that in our fluff that Putin had died of a heart attack, and the people who took over have promised democracy, and it's kind of hasn't really happened, but they no longer have imperialist ambitions. And then that's what we tell the whole the whole game. And then the Russian team, again, we don't tell them anything about, you know, they should be going to advance into Eastern Europe or anything like that. It's all about, you know, you want other things. The US are your abject adversaries, and you probably could work with China, but be careful of them. You want to get into space, that kind of stuff. So we very much do try to make sure that certainly in the briefs, it's sort of global politics with a sort of, it's zoomed out. Global politics. But then, like I said earlier on, once you get into the game, we had the one game. I know we had the UK like having babies, the Prime Minister having babies with the aliens by the end of it. Like it's completely zany and wacky, and that's what the players want. And I'm fully up for it. Like I'm here for it. But like we do try to make it. I guess not. I'm trying to say we do try to make it so that it's not, it's not the horror of the real world. Let's put it that way. In the politics, even though there is going to be, you don't like Team A because of X reason, they're not your friends, as it were.
Yeah, it makes sense, and to sort of approach it that way, I think, because. Even though they're going into games, people are going into games, especially geopolitical ones, sort of expecting that it's not going to be exactly like the real world because they've played a mega game before and they know that there's always alien babies. I think that some people would be let down if you were, changing the design of a game solely because of current affairs or things that have happened since the game was designed. I'm not sure if that's correct, but I feel like that's my sentiment, that it would feel like you're sort of bowing away from the creative idea of what the game was meant to be about, and letting ugliness come in and sort of influence the game, whereas everyone else, usually people coming to these games, at least in my experience, don't want to let that stuff seep in. They want to enjoy a game of fiction based on whatever, how it was designed to be.
Yeah, definitely, and certainly with, I mean, the major examples, like I say at the moment, are certainly Israel and Russia. And Russia is such a huge country in the world. It's not Soviet days anymore, but thank God. But like, it still throws its weight around a lot, like any sort of large country. And so we had a lot of discussions about this, because obviously when we first ran the game was essentially the year that Russia invaded Ukraine. So we had a lot of conversations about, do we take Russia out completely? Do we leave them in, but hobble them completely? Do we leave them in? And what we did at the end was basically say, look, we understand, we side with Ukraine, obviously, like, without a shadow of a doubt, we don't want this, but the ugly reality is that they are a big country, and if you take them out as an antagonist out of first contact with 200 players in it, you find, I think you would find that there's you would find there's not so much agitation and interest happening. Like, if everybody, much like on this podcast, if everybody agrees with each other, where's the fun in that? Like, it's not to say that what Russia are doing is fun, because it's absolutely not. It's horrendous. But in game terms, kind of zoom out and say, yes, they are the antagonists, but they're not. They don't have imperial ambitions in the game. The players might turn up and decide they have imperial ambitions. We certainly haven't given them that, and kind of off you go. Like, deal with what the players are going to do now after we've rolled the snowball off the edge of the cliff. I don't know. Are you keeping Russia and Israel in the game in Melbourne, Nellie, when you run it?
Yes, yeah, we are. We rehashed probably many of the same conversations that you did, mostly about Israel. And I would say that Israel may still be dicey. I think Russia we will keep, because that conflict is a little bit older. And feels, I think, a little bit less like visceral. But we looked at the team interactions and the balance of the regions, and we just went, well, those two countries in particular and their significance in geopolitics really undermines how well those relationships work if you take them out. And so we put up on the website, there's a kind of long disclaimer that basically explains the same thing, of our stance is very solidly against the invasions, but we have chosen to uphold the design decision. And I think the other thing with First Contact is that by setting it in the future, 10 years in the future, you have a little bit of an out, because in that world, it's not currently happening. You can kind of write the little, here's how that ended and what's happened in the 10 years since the world you're living in. But I think, if you have any doubt that players are coming into that really rooted in reality, you only have to look at the way that they handle nuke cards.
Yeah.
Players are not,
gosh, yeah.
they're playing in the real world, quote unquote, but not really, because the speed and conviction with which they're like, yes, we will launch nuclear weapons, because they were slightly rude to us in the science sphere.
Yeah. They're going to be side-eye. That's it. They're dead.
It is to Watch the Skies is to geopolitics what GTA is to driving a car. Basically,
Yes,
it's
exactly.
no consequences. Do whatever
Yeah.
you want.
And I think that's going back to that, relatability thing about the audience having something to latch onto. For these games, the real world is kind of the hook, in a way, because people can relate to it and picture it, but it's not really the end all be all of how the game's going to go. I guess on the tone thing, I just had one final comment, which it's just because I've been thinking about it a lot, because we've been sort of trying to signpost our games quite thoroughly with what people might expect from them, to make sure that nobody's surprised. It really came to mind last year when we were talking with Leon from Melbourne and you, Nellie, about running the Ark, and we had and this wasn't a big deal, but it just made me interested in the area, because it came up when we had a a control meeting, and eugenics came up because it's this sci-fi game about, it's got inspirations from the Fallout vaults, where there's kind of experiments happening on this arc, and it's got all these really strong identity teams that all have these really strong backgrounds and sort of goals and priorities and stuff. And there was one of them, I think, that sort of was all about biology and improving people and that kind of thing. And so we did have a little discussion about, well, could this stray into uncharted waters? And it didn't, but it was good to have that conversation regardless.
That's the conversation I think that preceded us for So Say We All saying,
right.
oh, we should talk to the facilitators about this, and then it probably won't come up.
Yes. Well, yeah, that was my lesson, because since then, with the Generalissimo's dead, we did put a disclaimer to say a bunch of things which could come up in this game because of the way it's written. And then the things that did come up, were totally unexpected, and they were okay, and they were received fine. But I do remember, and this is just, I guess this is how I want to close off, can you control tone? And I think that you can't, because the players just pursue things that you can never expect, and sometimes in the heat of the moment, it's hard to draw the line or know where a line is being crossed. And so in that game, in one of the games that we ran, we had a team who is sort of antagonistic and up to no good, and in a very satirical way. As anyone who hasn't listened to our discussion about that game, it's very much based on the death of Stalin, and it's got a lot of tongue-in-cheek mentions in there. And so this team, part of the game for them was getting prisoners who were sort of, away in the gulag or whatever, and getting them and choosing if they wanted to release them or not, because they could gain benefits from releasing people. So there were people who might be a benefit to society, and they were imprisoned under the last regime, so that if they released them as a little token that they handed in, they got a plus to something. And there was this moment in the game that was really high spectacle, as you'd say, Chris, and it was sort of a centerpiece of what was going to happen narratively, and all these events were happening around it. I guess I can say the game's called The Generalissimo is Dead, so the event was the funeral of the Generalissimo. Not really a spoiler. And so all these things, every team in the game was trying to figure out how to utilize that event for their own purposes. And I just had this I had this long list of things literally being jotted down on my clipboard about things that needed to be covered in sort of what was going to be a bit of narrative around the funeral. And I had one of the players from this team approach me and say, so at this thing, we've got these schemes underway, and sort of to sow a bit of chaos on the side, we're going to be releasing one of these prisoners at the event, and then we're also going to arm them. And I was like, oh, okay. So I was like, okay, nodding and smiling, and there was nothing malicious from this player. They were just playing their role as being the really vile internal security, secret police kind of person. And so then we went to the event, and it was a big spectacle, and there was lots announced and lots of narrative things happened. And then I remembered that thing at the last minute. I was like, oh yeah, and there's also an active shooter. And as soon as I said that, I was like, oh fuck, what did I just say? But no one cared. No one, or at least I don't think anyone cared. But I can imagine that a different audience wouldn't have received that as well, in different places. And so I think that was a lesson for me, that no matter what we do to sign, that was not on our sort of content warning list of things that could come up in this game, and nor should it have been, because it's not really relevant to the theme. And that was a real lesson for me, I guess, about how hard it is to control tone once you hand it to the players. They're interpreting this fiction and this world, and there's only so much you can do to control what kind of things that they come up with and how they interpret those things. So yeah,
definitely.
Warning for everyone. It was still fun though. Just something I didn't think I would say in a mega game. Yeah. So that's my anecdote on tone, and be wary of it.
I think we've all
So-
in a facilitator moment had the microphone and said
Yeah.
something and then walked away and
Oh
been
yeah.
like, "Oh,
Yeah.
that was not my best moment."
Glad no one was filming that. Yeah.
So with that conversation about how hard it is or how perhaps impossible it is to control tone, how do you think player safety is best managed around that? Like, given that it probably is with 50 people or 200 people, you do not have total control over what people are going to say or what topics are going to come up. Yeah, how have you handled that in your games? What do you think is the best way to handle those kinds of issues, I guess?
Oh, I have strong thoughts about this.
It may be a whole episode of something in the future.
Safety tools.
I guess.
I think
Yeah,
maybe
sorry,
a
go on.
blog post, safety tools for mega games. I think that in
Hmm.
general, when you are playing with strangers, you just all have to be adults. And a lot of what I think forms the safety tools that we use in mega games happens in the background, and then there's a little like speech that whoever is kind of leading the game will say at the start about, these are where the lines are. So no racism, no homophobia, etc., etc. Generally, don't be a dick, but we do expect you to like play to your brief, and some of those are very antagonistic. And if you're ever feeling not great, try and talk to the other player first, and then bring it to a facilitator, and we will intervene. And when you've got those kind of darker cases so for example, with So Say We All, a friend of mine like let me know quite a bit before the game that having been the military, they had a hard line around torture. And I was a bit like, well, you are running a risk coming to this game because like a core premise is that the way that you're trying to figure out who the aliens are is by like capturing them and interrogating them, and that's going to cross that line super quickly. So we can be aware of that and we can, mediate that. But the mega game context, it's always going to be too high of a logistical overhead to ask people to declare their lines in advance. Beyond, if you're doing a casting form, is there anything else you want to tell us that's going to help you have a good game experience? So I think it really is about setting a precedent for the players of just be mindful of everyone else in this space, and be kind to each other while you're playing and telling a good story and being silly and dramatic. And that so far has worked perfectly. Fingers crossed, touch wood, that's really where it keeps going. But yeah, in general, with like, home games of role-playing games versus public games of role-playing games, I'm very much like, stuff like X cards doesn't work for me. You just need to be able to have a conversation with someone else about what's going on, and if something's really upset you, like just remove yourself, find a way to communicate to that to someone. And the second that people realize you're really upset, they will be kind about it. Is kind of my view. It's rarely malicious.
Yeah, I don't think much more I can add to that. We did the same thing in Very Large. We have information in the handbook. We put it on the back of their sort of A6 badges that they get given. Although I'm sure people don't have time to look at the back of their badges. We tell them in the opening brief that if you do, like Nellie just mentioned, if something upsets you, you have concerns, and you can either speak to the person who's upsetting you, which may not be possible, and that's completely understandable. Remove yourself first, and then come and see a facilitator, and we'll help. I think the community generally is very, very welcoming and very understanding. And as much as there's drama in the moment, it's usually the character, as much as they're playing themselves in that role, it's the character they're portraying. And if somebody brought up something that they're concerned about, then I'm sure everybody would stop immediately and talk about it, or get a facilitator involved, and then resolve it. And we do say to people, like, if you want to step out of the game 5-10 minutes, half an hour, then absolutely go ahead. Like, your mental health is much more important than the game. The game will carry on, of course, but go get a cup of tea, go outside, get some fresh air, get away from all the chaos for 10 minutes. But whatever it is you should do is absolutely what you should do. Your health is much more important than the game.
Definitely. Yeah, completely agree. Yeah, I think it is something. I think it could be a whole other episode or a blog post, but it is something that is kind of, I think, critical to at least think about as you're discussing these things, because as we talked about, it is so difficult to control once the game's actually going and once everything's once the shit hits the fan.
I think the only thing I'd add is which I know that Melbourne you've done a lot, Nellie, and we've been doing in Sydney, sort of post COVID, is having dedicated people for that kind of stuff. We've had really good success in the last couple of runs.
Absolutely, yeah.
Generalissimo's Dead, and also the games last year, with sort of well-being people who are just there to keep an eye on not just people who might be upset or offended or overwhelmed, but also people who are lost or bored or disengaged for some reason, just to help get them back on track and make sure they have a good time. Very worthwhile having a person invested in that all day.
100%. I think we definitely stole that from the UK, and it may well have been from Very Large, with having a new player control or facilitator. And I think after doing that once, we went, it's not just the new players. Like the new players do generally, you do want to watch out for them, but often they are just jumping into it, and it's actually. We had a couple of instances of people having played two very similar games as their only exposure to mega games, and then jumping into something completely different and having had those prior expectations really color that experience. And that came up as something that we completely weren't expecting as more of a well-being issue. So we changed it to this welfare or well-being role. And the latest evolution of that is that the people that we ask to do that now are people who have mental health first aid training and who are a little bit older. So because Melbourne Megagames came out of a university group, the age demographic has skewed quite young. And it's generally the people who run it, we are 26, 27, 28 just. And yeah, the last game, the guy we had on welfare is in his 30s, has done community theatre stuff for decades, and had so much more experience dealing with people in not even crisis mode, but just a bit stressed out, that I watched him interact with someone who was on the verge of tears about just finding the game very overwhelming. She stayed for the whole day. And I honestly don't think that if anyone else had been the one to have the conversation with her, that would have been the success story. So I was like, well, you've unfortunately made yourself the only person we can ask to do this now by being too good at it. But he I think gets a lot out of doing that. So that's great for us. But yeah, that's something that I think originally we were just it just needs to be someone who can be friendly. The other trick we picked up is that it's much better to ask players, what are you doing at the moment? Tell me what's happening for you, than asking, are you okay? Do you, is something wrong? Trying to get them to articulate the, positive will tell you where the gaps are. Whereas if you just ask them what's wrong, sometimes they lie to you, or they just will, downplay the issue, really, is what I'm saying.
Yeah,
so
that was something.
Questioning strategy.
That's what we spoke a lot here.
That's an amazing tip.
Not just saying, why aren't you enjoying this, or why aren't you having a good time, but rather asking what's the best part of the day so far, or what have you enjoyed, and then helping steer them into that. So getting to know a bit more about them helps a lot, rather than just categorizing them as someone who is struggling. Yeah, definitely a good approach.
Or what do you want to do? What are you trying to do? Can I help you do that better? That is a Yolanda Diamantis special, just not to claim that for myself.
I love the game warden or safety warden role. That's awesome. In Brisbane, we've also tried having a dedicated chill out room for people who are a bit overwhelmed, which has been really good as well, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's awesome.
So we should probably look at wrapping up. A thought, maybe we should end on a key tip. We tend to do that these days when we're not talking about specific games. So I don't know. Maybe we could start with you, Nellie. If you've got a key tip or one key thing about sort of, I guess, to wrap up everything that we've talked about, both theme and tone, how you go about what's your key tip for setting player expectation before they come to a game?
I think I've had a few sprinkled throughout, but I think the one I want to hit home is that you can signal to players that there are safety tools and you're thinking about trying to ensure a positive experience for everyone without really bringing the mood down about it. Because I've been a player in places where it's a 5-minute rant and you feel like you're being schooled about, don't be a terrible person. Like, yeah, come on, we're all adults. So that's I think trying to hash out for your own community what are the positive signals we can give. And this is true in our code of conduct, which is the other thing. Have a code of conduct. Have something you can point to if something does go wrong. But even our code of conduct is framed explicitly in the positive for the most part. That's my advice.
Yeah, awesome. Chris, what have you learned from very large, huge games? What do you recommend people focus on when they're setting player expectations?
I'll switch it slightly, and not for player expectations specifically, but I think if you're a designer or an organizer, there's a lot less of them than players, and not a huge amount of players out there. But if you are one of those, then choose a zeitgeisty theme. Like if you want to sell your game out, make it a zeitgeist thing, make it fun, make it something that people can latch onto immediately. That's what I would say. That's what we've done. That's why I've kind of forced very much huge games. That's why we're doing D's and Destiny. Like it just make it zeitgeisty. If you want to sell your game, maybe you don't. Maybe you want to. You're quite happy with 20 players, and that's fine. Do you? But if you want to sell out, make it a zeitgeist game.
I have to come in and say that I think the theme that is most underserved in Mega Games is Gothic horror and Lovecraftian horror, and there is an untapped well around that. And God Emperor gets to it a little bit, but I want to see more.
Cthulhu's Pizza Shop.
No, that game I would play.
Coming next from Sydney Mega Games.
Coming in 2025.
Sign me up.
Very good. Jack, do you have any final thoughts on theme or tone?
Geez, I think we've talked about a lot of topics. I think the only thing I would say is that I think starting with that player fantasy is a really great place to start, right? Of like, who are you in this world and why is it exciting to be that person? Why is it exciting to have that role? I think that's a really useful, the team fantasy, maybe I should say, I think is a really good place to get started. What about you, Pat? What would you say?
I'm not sure I think I could just support everything that the three of you have said. I really agree with the thematic thing. I think it can be hard to get an idea off the ground if people don't have anything to latch onto. And I totally agree with all of the expectation setting, being upfront with players about what to expect and what kind of things could come up in the game, and then giving them the tools that they need to navigate it. So, I don't think I can add anything more to what we've all discussed. I think we've covered a lot of ground.
The coward's way out. You said you were going to be.
Okay. Well, fucking no lunch breaks and no welfare. That's what
we all hate
my final take.
to a totally abstract mega
Yeah,
game.
no theme, no mechanic, no components. Everyone needs to sort of BYO. And
mass hallucination.
Yeah. And
Sure, it's one of those games.
Yeah. Okay. On that note, before we stray into any unknown territory, Nellie, people, if they want to hear more about you and what you're doing down in Melbourne, where can they find you?
MelbourneMegagames.com, where you can find out all of the other places that we are, including our Discord. Everything is linked through our website.
And Chris?
Very large, huge games.com, and join our mailing list. You'll find out when we're going to run our next game first.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you both. If anyone is listening along and they've got some thoughts, please jump onto our Discord and tell us about what you think about tone and game themes. Tell us what we didn't fix, because we tend to try and ultimately 100% fix mega game related problems on this podcast. So tell us where we went wrong, and you can also send us an email. All those things are in the description below. Thank you both for coming along, and hope you enjoy the rest of your days.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.